Hello and welcome to Integral Centering, where we explore pathways to wholeness and well-being for every stage of life. I'm Robert Strohmeyer, and with me today is Dr. Simone DiMatteo. Dr. Simone is a professor of management organization systems and the MBA chair at Sophia University, and is a terrific guest to speak with today on the subject of calling and professional identity. Today, we're going to be talking about how our sense of calling and purpose in our work lives and our livelihoods informs our sense of who we are and the meaning of what we do. Dr. Simone, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I couldn't be more excited about this topic. Professional identity is really at the core of the research I do and was a central motivating factor in establishing integral centering in the first place. And you have been a tremendous influence on the way I think about approaching this research. I would love it if you would just give us a little bit of grounding in your research journey and what your focus is.
So, I am researching leadership from the perspective of leading a group of multi-generational team members. So, it used to be that we had this sort of homogenous team view of leadership, and now through the generational shifts that are going on, we have 5 different generations in the workforce, and the oldest being the boomers, and the youngest being coming in now is the alphas, or just starting to come in. And so the variance between what the boomers experienced in their formative years versus what Gen Z and Alpha are experiencing in their years, for example, technology, right? The younger generations don't know a world without technology as we know it today. And the boomers grew up with no technology. Like they didn't have calculators. So it's such a dynamic between the two that I feel like from a leadership perspective, it has to add more layers and dimension to leading a team. So that's kind of my perspective on my research.
Well, and it seems like maybe this is a Gen Xer bringing this to the table, right? But the concept of calling and professional identity has shifted dramatically over the last 30 years. I remember when I was coming into my professional life, coming out of college, my parents were utterly shocked by the notion that people weren't staying with the same company for 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
And when you got your first job, that wasn't going to essentially be central to your identity for your entire adult life. And so this notion that most people in my generation perceived their professional identity as something compartmentalized from the rest of their life, they seemed to have a much more central identification with that. And so it was easier to feel as though you had been called into whatever that profession was. And in a post, indentured servitude world, what does it mean to have a professional identity? So is that similar to?
That is definitely one of the things that comes up in my research all the time. I think about, for example, in my first study, I took the 5 generations and asked them, what's important to you in the workplace? And is there a difference? Is there not a difference? Right? So it came up that there was a difference statistically, but it made me wonder, is this the influence of how things have changed over time? Boomers, lawyer, doctor, kind of, that's what engineer, lawyer, doctor, engineer was the focus, right? Women were housewives. So that mentality to what it is today is so different. So that gold watch thing, gone, right? We all know that, right? Gen X is the first generation. They used to call them the job hopping generation because they would stay somewhere for a few years, move on. And what they were looking for, according to the research, is that workplace well-being, that sense of belonging, that sense of purpose in their work, instead of it just being about title or recognition or status. So I'd say Gen X kind of broke the mold. out of necessity. They're also the generation that technology started in. So, or became, I shouldn't say started in, I should say became more popular, more common, more household. And as you move down the generations closer to today, you're dealing with workers who have a totally different view of the world. They can see the world through technology. Whereas the boomers had, 3 channels and the news came through 3 channels, right? Like now they have access to all the information in the world. So it's very dynamic in that. Is it a career thing? Is it parental? Is it, influences? Is it really generational? Is it just the stage each person is in their life? And they're making decisions based on where they're at in that moment.
And that sense of life stage driven career identity, I think, is at the center of this topic of calling today, especially because so many of our viewers and listeners are in a moment of life transition
Mm.
themselves. Many are in later stage career and really rethinking the purpose and meaning of that point in their working lives. I hear from a lot of people who are at this inflection point where they're now empty nesters and thinking a lot more about the years ahead of them that are still working years and how to make those as impactful and fulfilling as possible. I also hear from a lot of people who are impacted by macroeconomic forces and the concept of retirement
Mhm.
for them is not what it was 20 years ago, right? This notion that you'll hit 65 and punch out from the career and go sit on the deck of a cruise ship for the rest of your life isn't a thing for so many people now.
Yeah.
And so, faced with the prospect of working long term where that might not have been an initial expectation, how then does one make the most of those later working years, especially if they're in a career where the role they've been in isn't tenable or available to them beyond a certain point? I mean, ageism is real.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no doubt that it's easier to pay a younger, non-experienced worker lower dollars than it is to pay an experienced older worker. But what you lose in that is the knowledge, right? And that is where it's an intangible that organizations don't understand the value of. Our retention is what got me into studying the different generations. Have we spend an exorbitant amount of money on retention year over year. And the whole hiring process is geared towards the worker bee mentality, right? That just get them in the seat and get them to do the work rather than exploring continuous learning and improvement and in an environment that fosters a long-term commitment to the company. It used to be that it was automatic. That commitment was automatic. And the whole employee employer relationship is a two-way street, which is something I think over the generations we're learning too. It's not just about what the employer needs, it's about what the employee needs as well, whether that's monetarily, and we can talk about Maslow's hierarchy, but the reality is a lot of us in our older years who are going through whatever transition we're going through are looking for that upper level on the hierarchy satisfaction in our jobs. That is the number one thing for boomers and Xers is job satisfaction. So what does that mean, right? Like when we talk about calling and we talk about purpose, I know for myself, I kind of landed in these places where I had the skills and the talent, but I wasn't fulfilled. Like it was like, yes, I'm doing the job. And yes, it put a roof over my kids' heads and took care of my kids' teeth and, college, the whole 9 yards. But it was never feeling like I was doing something that, kind of like juicy feeling where you get up in the morning, you're like, yay, let's go, right? Um, until recently. But the thread of leadership has been there the entire time. I didn't recognize it until later in life, but that thread has been with me since I was teeny tiny. I can remember it. thinking about leadership way back when. So that, whatever that thread is that vibrates within you, that's where your purpose and your calling is, whatever that is. And it can be multiple. It doesn't have to be one, right? Like maybe it's helping others grow in combination. For me, that means I'm helping grow leaders. And I feel like that is an impact that we can all benefit from.
That distinction between calling and a job, or even calling and a career, is so central to, I think, the way we experience these transitions and these mid-stage, late-stage career crises. I think, often what we see are people at a mid-stage career crisis are often concerned that they're simply not getting to the level of seniority or status or compensation that they had imagined for themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
often there's a mid-stage career panic that's about how do I just get to the next strata of status and leadership. And yet, beyond that, what often seems to be the case is that people have a different kind of crisis. And no matter how senior they are,
Mm-hmm.
I talk to people, I do workshops with people in very senior positions in
Mm-hmm.
their careers who have achieved about as much of the money and status and power as they ever could have hoped for, and are suddenly dealing with a very different crisis of meaning
Mm-hmm.
and wondering what their calling is. I can't tell you how many times I've had people in executive roles say, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
they're approaching retirement.
Right. I've coached many leaders who I've, asked that question of what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I think that maybe 5% of the world come out of the womb like, I know what I want to be, right? And off they go, right? It's the rest of us that are like, what am I doing with my life? What am I supposed to be? How do I get there? And somehow you land in an executive level position and you're like, okay, this is great, but right. And that's very central to my own work with leaders and my own self on my own career path and feeling like, is this really what I want to be doing? Right. And loving what I'm doing, but not. And in that dichotomy, because we separate out our professional self from our personal self, and especially the older generations. So this is another thing in the generational rub that's going on in the work world today. The younger generations show up as who they are. They don't have a concept of like, okay, here's my professional life, here's my family life, here's like compartmentalizing that we talked about earlier. They don't have that same approach to life. They're like, oh, here I am. Take it or leave it, right? So I actually kind of envy them sometimes that centralizing the different aspects of who we are and then trying to pull all that together later in life, right? So empty nesters, the identity of parenting and being a parent becomes less prominent. So we sort of pull back that identity because our children are often on their own, right? And it's a whole new relationship for us. When we get to a point in our career where, as you talked about, okay, great, I've hit this level, but it doesn't quite resonate. What is, how do we deal with that? And part of that is bringing all of our pieces together and recognizing who we are as a whole human being instead of, okay, I'm this at work and I'm this in my family life and I'm this with my partner and I'm this with my friends and this with my children, right? So who am I as a whole person is really the question at the base of that conundrum that we all face, or most of us face.
And articulating that challenge is often one of the biggest steps in moving toward some kind of reconciliation. But how do you envision and how do you propose for somebody who is beginning to experience that sense of separation, that sense that something is amiss? How do you propose approaching that with curiosity and openness to be able to recognize what there even is to synthesize?
What we take into the world with our curiosity and our openness needs to be given to ourselves. We need to give that gift to ourselves and say, it's okay that I'm not that. It's okay I'm not what my parents thought I should be, right? It's okay I'm not what my sibling or children or anybody else. It's okay that I'm not those things, but what is it I want to be? And those exercises of understanding who you are and having self-awareness about who you are starts to weave all of that together. So the more you learn about yourself, the more obvious it becomes. The more you can see into yourself and see yourself as a whole being. And that takes a lot of grace. It takes a lot of kindness and compassion and empathy for yourself, because we have a tendency to judge ourselves as having always done the wrong thing and never done the right thing. So it's getting rid of those wrong thing moments that come to the forefront when we're looking at our history, and looking for the gems, looking for those bright spots, those moments of accomplishment where you felt really good and you felt really alive. Those are the moments that are going to tell us and help us weave all of those parts of us back together.
I think it also takes a kind of courage, doesn't it? Especially if you have achieved at a high level. If you're at a stage in life where you've got a pretty good score sheet behind you,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a big part of that is income, and maybe a big part of that is a fat salary that's going to be pretty hard to walk away from. And
Yeah.
I talk to people who themselves are at a point where they feel like the salary is no longer the drive. Maybe they're fine financially and could walk away from it, but
Maybe they're
because
not.
because their family members perhaps, right, may feel differently about that, right?
Yeah.
And so being at that point of crisis where you're weighing your impact on the world versus the compensation.
Yeah. Compensation is always going, and we don't go to work to not make money. I mean, it's part of the fabric of life. It's part of taking care of ourselves, taking care of our families, taking care of others. So money is part of the picture. You have to consider where your values lie within that context and learn that about yourself so that you can make that decision. Is this the right time? Is this the right place? I know when I had to make that decision, I came out of my PhD right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so for me, just being locked away was like, okay, I have 5 minutes to breathe. But it also gave me a lot of time to go inside and think about what is it I want to do now that I've achieved this goal that I've always known I wanted to do, but never really had a reason of why I wanted to do it. Like, I didn't get my PhD to say, oh, I want to be in this position. I got my PhD to challenge myself, to have the courage to challenge myself, and knew that it would help me, knew that it would help guide me to where I wanted to go, or where I thought I wanted to go. But it also was the achievement of it that was driving me. And I was exhausted. Literally, my kids were out of the house. It's at that place where I was just like, okay, I can take 5 minutes to breathe. And as I came through that process, I realized I am so unhappy in the corporate world at this point in time in my life. This is, it was great for what I needed to take care of my kids as a single mom. It was great for amassing an amazing amount of skills. I have this broad spectrum of skills, both technical, hard, and soft skills, that I could gear towards what is it that I wanted to do. And as I, kind of came into teaching, I realized, oh, I've always been a teacher. This has always been here. I just never realized it, and had this moment of memory and meditation of saying to my mom, I want to be a teacher when I was like 3 years old, right? And feeling that joy that I felt then, and realized, this is what I'm looking for. These are the moments I'm looking for in my life to get me where I want to go. So those happy, again, we have to put aside all that judgment of ourselves and just look for those moments of joy. When I've worked with leaders, and I've worked with leaders for a long time at the C-level and at the board level, I had a C-level executive say to me, you make me want to be a better person. And it just, like, for me, that warmth, that feeling, that joy that you feel about living your purpose made me realize I like growing leaders. I like helping leaders grow. So it's finding those bright spots in your career life that help you to kind of knit it all back together and find the space where you're supposed to be.
Your journey really does feel like a microcosm of the entire topic, right? That, I mean, first of all, probably not everybody can relate to wanting to go get a PhD, right?
Right. I didn't even
And
know
even
I
those who
wanted to
can
either.
might think better of it, right?
There's a reason only, what is it, 3% of the world's population has a PhD.
But
Talk
I
about
think that
courage.
most people can relate to this sense, right? That there is a high goal for themselves that they would like to pursue, whatever that is. I mean, for some
Right.
people, it might be that they always wanted to master the guitar or
Right.
become fluent in Japanese, right?
Or build their own business as opposed to work for somebody else. Or
Absolutely.
there's a million different manifestations of what is it I want to be.
Mhm. And as you start parsing out the distinction between what your career is and what your available or visible career opportunities are versus what you actually really get satisfaction from doing. What is that process like? In the kind of in the mechanics of it, right? If you kind of unpack, like, I'm in this inflection point, right? I'm realizing that I'm far along and changing course is going to be a disruption.
Yeah.
But there are things that I do, that I experience, that I know give me satisfaction in my work, and I want to pursue those things. What would you prescribe to somebody who's in that inflection point and trying to do that inventory?
I think, after you've found those moments of clarity in your life where it says this is where you want to be and that resonates for you, like it just, it's a feeling that's that wholeness feeling of like, oh, I found a piece of myself, right? I think part of it is understanding what it means because just like going for your PhD and we talk about, the gap in the knowledge. There's so much knowledge out there. I mean, really, truly, is there an original thought, right? And you have to narrow it down and narrow it down and narrow it down to this place where you're like, this is what I want to study and this is doable. So there's two sides to that. This is what I want to do and this is possible. And the minute you know that it's possible, you start to align yourself with that. Your intentions start to align, your being starts to align, and you're looking at that as your goal. So the universe sort of provides, at least in my experience. So that experience of narrowing down to a focal point that allows you to see the bigger picture is what you're looking for, right? In that process. So it takes a lot of looking at who you are, looking at what you like, knowing what you can tolerate versus what you really don't like and what you really want to do. So for me, for example, when I was going through that shift, I was thinking about what is it I really like to do? Well, obviously leadership is, as I mentioned before, is one thing. Okay. But is it just about me leading? No, no, this is about helping others lead better for me. So asking myself those hard questions of, is this about me? Is this about others? Is this something I can do for the interim for a couple of years to get to where I need to go? I certainly didn't think I'd be doing what I was doing when I got into making my shift, both in the corporate world and higher ed. But I was open to it, knowing that it was going to get me where I wanted to go because I could see where I wanted to go. But even taking the position that I'm in now as a leader, it wasn't like it wouldn't have been my first choice. It wasn't the top of my list, right? In fact, it was something I was like, really? Is this what I want to do? Right? Because of experiences in my past, I was kind of carrying that with me in this moment of decision and really frustrated with like, which way do I go, which way do I go? And so stepping back and looking at who I am and like, okay, what is it that I like about this position, what is it I don't like? And that pro con list thing is not a fallacy. It helps everybody to frame what they're thinking, and then there's the gray area in the middle, right? So we could say, oh, I love this and I hate that, but what about that toleration in the middle? And I knew that I could tolerate getting there if I took my time, as long as I got there. And then when the opportunity came up and I was resisting it, I had to ask myself, why am I resisting this? What is it about this that is causing me to feel this angst and this anxiety, and have the courage to go to the other side of that? And in that process of like meditating and talking to people who know me well and saying, okay, why is this bothering me? Why do you think this is bothering me? And I have a couple of close friends that could like, this is why. Because you have been coaching MBA leaders for so long that being an MBA chair seems kind of antithetical. And so after having that great glass of wine with a girlfriend kind of thing moment, and sitting down and meditating and thinking about it from through her eyes, I was able to see that it was actually not the opposite of what I wanted to do, but very much what I wanted to do. It was incorporating my leadership, my transpersonal, myself, and my desire to grow others and teach others into this one space that I could be me. And
There's a
that's what you're
great
looking for.
there's a great line from a book and movie called Fight Club,
Very popular in our household.
right? That I mean, that is, you're not your job,
Mhm.
right? And I think that sits at the core, right? There's more to that line for those who are fans of the movie, but and it ends with "You're not your khakis," right?
Right, right,
But you're
right.
not. Your identity is not these things, and that can often be one of the most challenging things to overcome. Is what you do
Who
who
you
you
are.
are? And I think that we understand intuitively that it's not, but when we consider change, when we consider making a leap from what we have been doing that has been working for us and supporting us to imagining ourselves doing something very different that can feel as though it's disrupting our identity,
Yeah.
as we wrap up this conversation, I think that another dimension of it is often we are compelled by outside forces
Mhm.
to look at a new path, to consider different options. I talk to people who were laid off from very successful careers at a late stage and have really struggled to reconsider what they're going to do going forward and what that means to their identity. It isn't that they couldn't go and do something else and be very successful at it, but in making that leap, there's a kind of admission that you didn't end the path you were on the way you wanted to and on your own terms.
There's a starting over, right? There's the fear of starting over. What is it going to look like? I did this whole thing and it stopped, especially if it stops abruptly, right? Even if you make the choice to leave a position, there's still a change going on for you. Regardless of whether that choice is yours or not, change is happening. And change is always the place where people get stuck in fear. But change is happening all the time. We just deal with some change better than we deal with other. And especially something as life transforming as getting laid off, or your career stopping and having to look at, what am I going to do next? The the beauty of being able to stop and say, what am I going to do next, is you have a whole white canvas in front of you, right? You have the whole world in front of you to create whatever it is that you want to create. It's not limited by the fact that you were laid off, as much as people take it that way, right? I got laid off. It broke my momentum. It broke my chain. But the universe is moving you, or whatever you want to call it. There's a reason for everything. And that move towards understanding, what is it I'm supposed to be doing, and having the courage to go find that. And even if it means starting over, I mean, that having to change your ways, part of it, right? Like, so maybe you're C-level and you get laid off, and that income level is a dramatic shift, right? Like, it's a cliff. But when you're thinking about, oh, well, what do I get to do next? Money becomes less of a concern. It's, what do I need to take care of the things I need to take care of? And how do I find joy? Rather than just, I'm in this making the money that I'm making. and I'm not finding joy. So you have the opportunity to go find joy. So there's hope in that.
And finding joy ultimately, I think, is at the core of what calling is, right? There are a lot of definitions of calling,
Yeah.
but that sense of being destined for some kind of purpose, right?
Yeah.
And the research here tells us quite a bit about what makes people genuinely fulfilled and happy. And it isn't paychecks. Actually, very high salaries are negatively correlated with happiness, right? Very senior level titles are negatively correlated with happiness. But that sense of having found something that really fulfills you, something that you feel like you're being the person you are,
Mm-hmm.
fulfilling a greater purpose in the world and doing some good is very positively correlated
Yes.
with
Yes.
happiness.
And income doesn't matter, right? So in my studies, compensation is never the first priority. It's somewhere in the middle, usually typically about the third priority. And so it's not necessarily anybody's focus to go out and say, I'm going to make this money. We all go out and say, I'm going to work to make money, right? But what we do and how we do it is the difference. And this, I think, is where there's been a major shift. It used to be, you did one thing. You became the doctor, the lawyer, the engineer, right? In the new world of work, you do multiple things. So teacher, chair, professor, and also coach. And so I'm using all of my skills and all of my talents to find fulfillment in multiple areas. So it doesn't have to be just one anymore, which I think is magic because I feel as multidimensional as human beings are. I feel that it can't be just one thing. It doesn't have to be. So you can make multiple stream channels, right? Multiple revenue channels.
Yeah, that detachment, right, between the job and the self. I think that's a great place for us to leave it, right? Because as we think about what ultimately matters, that ability to distinguish between the things you do that fulfill you, which can be many things, and the things you do that make money, which can also be many things. And in this world where we have found that, an individual's career path is increasingly by outside forces divorced from this notion of having a central job and stream of income.
Yeah.
Maybe that tells us something about the direction that relationship between calling and work ultimately have for us here in 2025.
Yeah. I think weaving the two together are important because that pulls more of your pieces together of who you are as a whole person, allowing you to show up more as a whole person.
Dr. Simone, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your journey and your observations on the complexity of finding our livelihood and our identities in this kind of increasingly wild
Busy, busy world, right?
reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so
You're
great to have you
welcome.
on the program.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening, for watching. We will look forward to seeing you again with another episode.